On the home stretch here, almost Miller time. So we covered a lot of ground this weekend. Any aspects of it in particular seem any more shady for you than any other aspects of it?
Pretty shady.
You say you often use the term advanced yogis and beginners and in between, you know. But then you also say you're at the finish line already.
Yes.
So I mean, how would one think of that? I mean, is there really a progression that's happening, or is that just or not?
It can't really be said. It's not really like that. There both is and isn't. Let me see. I'll define beginner and advanced for you in a hopefully useful and hopefully amusing way. A beginner sees the finish line and is really geared up and pumped up to go give it its best to get there. An advanced is at the finish line, and those that are always at the finish line, and is almost contented in that fact. And a realized yogi knows that there's no finish line, no race. But all of that is really irrelevant. I mean, talking about that is only provisionally useful in terms of trying to explain why very, very differing and even contrasting and contradictory advice may be relevant to one person and another person, because it all very much depends on what kinds of issues they seem to be working with. And it's not a value judgment or a hierarchy. There's no importance whatsoever in one's, rating technically in terms of where one is. It's really just a matter of sort of, it's more a matter of seeing what your appropriate tricks and techniques are for the situation you seem to find yourself in. And the kinds of tricks and techniques that are very useful and efficient for someone else might be completely useless for someone else because they aren't in a situation where they can apply them, and vice versa. I mean, in a way, all of this is trickery. And the problems are trickery and the solutions are trickery. So yoga is a very strange mind game where you're trying to solve problems you don't really have with solutions you don't really need, to discover that you don't have the problems and therefore you don't need the solutions, which is a completion of yoga.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, if it feels like you have the problems, then you're free to try to apply the solution.
But it could be a little counterproductive to be spinning your wheels trying to fix this non-existent problem.
Yes, it could be. It definitely could. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, don't do it because it seems like you're supposed to be. You meet a real and pressing need. That's why it's very important. The number one thing is the actual reality of your experience. What's up with what's going on there? That's what you're dealing with. That's what will tell you what to do about it if anything seems to need to be done about it. This is, a lot, in terms of talking about this stuff, a lot of different nuances and complexities can seem to be implicit in this, but really it is the essence of simplicity. It's just this that is right here. This that is right here, always right here, always right now, exactly that. That's the entire story. That's the problem, that's the solution, that's the starting point, that's the goal, that's the path. And it's the way it seems to be any of those things is what makes yoga relevant, but it isn't actually any of those things, and yoga is irrelevant. But don't let its irrelevancy stop you from taking advantage of it if it seems appropriate and helpful. But it's really just keep coming back to home base. It's just this. It's just this. This is what it's all about. And if you're having sort of complexities and erecting superstructures of analysis, it's like just no, just this right here. So it's really, really just, you know, this that is here is the whole shooting match. This is all answers. This is the finish. This is the beginning and the end. This is the alpha and the omega, and you are this. And since it is that, and it is the way that is, the seeing that is the goal. And there's no non-goal. It's given. It's always the case. If you have difficulty seeing it, seemingly, then you can play with that in terms of these various yogic remedies and so on. But it itself is not broken and does not need to be fixed. And you are it. And if you seem not to be it, then that's something you can also look at. When you discover that you are it, then all of a sudden you have no problems because there's no you to have problems. There's just it. And it has no problems, certainly. You don't hear the universe up there bitching and kvetching. It just shines on.
It seems when you're looking into the future and projecting some plan, that there's a certain kind of hypnosis that gets you caught in more solidly in it versus other when it doesn't really matter. I mean, however it goes, it goes.
Sure, perhaps. What about that?
I'm just trying to, because on the one hand, the activities don't matter, but there's a sense that they do when you're actually projecting them, otherwise you wouldn't want to do them.
Yes, but it's not that the projection is wrong. The projection is like having a set of plans for a house. When you get to actually building the house, it's all of a sudden you're in the real world, and you may try to approximate the plans, but the house is not the plans, and the plans is not the house. So all of that kind of mechanism is fine. The trick is to not expect it to be to correlate exactly. Nothing turns out the way you anticipate, and nothing is what you think it is, even in real time, let alone what you expect it to become. And yet, these exercises of intelligence can be very useful and practical for functioning and so on and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's all imagination. It's using imagination as like a crutch or training wheels for functioning.
Right.
Functioning is always by direct energy engagement. And thought, it sort of runs parallel to functioning, pretends to run parallel to functioning with its pretense of analysis and planning and so on and so forth. And that may feel like it's useful, but they're parallel and they're not really connected all that intimately, because again, functioning is of a whole different ilk. Functioning is by direct energy engagement.
You separate between imagination and the commentary, the thinking.
Splitting hairs. None of those things exist as separate things, and so they're not really actually separate. It's just for the sake of discussion or analysis, you can think of them as being separate because they may have degrees of different texture. The way we differentiate everything in experience is texturally. Vision is differentiable from sound because it has a different texture. You can instantly tell you're seeing something, and as opposed to when you're hearing something, because sound has a different texture than light, and touch has a different texture than either of those. Thought has a different texture, and so where you draw there's more or less a continuum of all this range of amazing different textures that can show up experientially, and where you draw the lines between them is rather arbitrary, especially when you get into mental realms like thought and imagination and so on, and emotion. They're all just variations of texture that are differentiable because the textures are different textures. But they're not. It's not like, oh, this is this and that's that and this is over here and that's over there.
Is there a more conducive use of imagination?
Any use of imagination is conducive. Imagination is wonderful for entertainment. Imagination is wonderful for simulation. Imagination is like the holodeck. You can simulate. You're creating virtual simulations. You're creating like virtual reality enactments of hypothetical scenarios. Which what use could that be? It's a medium of experience. It's a medium of participation. And what use does any medium of experiential participation have? It all smears together. It's not discrete. The problem isn't any of these modes. The problem is when you confuse them. When you start thinking imagination is actual, that's delusion. Imagination is not delusion. But supposing that your imagination actually applies to sensory reality or something is. It's a really good exercise. I really recommend it. A very good yogic exercise is just sort of run your awareness up and down the spectrum of experiential texture and notice the range of all the different sort of dimensions of experiential phenomena that can appear. And notice the way they all happen in their own dimension and don't actually impinge on each other. We talked about that a little bit yesterday with the sense fields. So you can visualize that as just sort of a huge. In Rosicrucian times, they had a wonderful symbol for the sort of universal energy. They would have a single string, like a violin, or with a single string that stretched from 0 to infinity, the frequency. And so you could play any different frequency of notes on the string. And at the low end, they had matter, and then it went up, and it went up into mind, and then it went up into angels and subtle energies, and then heavenly spheres, and so on and so forth, up into the top you got to God. Because of course this was the Middle Ages, and they were looking at it in those terms. But if you look at the frequencies, or let's call it degrees of density, or textural density, or what have you. Again, you can't be very precise about this conceptually. Of the different experiential qualities, and you can kind of roughly stratify them by low frequency versus higher frequency, or coarser versus finer, or what have you, and you can kind of run up the frequencies, and you find yourself with sense fields, and then you get to conscious thought, and then you get to imagination, and then you get to nonverbal thought, and then you get to a kind of a finer level of sort of where dreams happen, and then you get up, and so on and so forth, and you get up into you start getting up into the inherent intelligence, where you get into what's often called the mental plane, which is it's like crystalline infinite fractals of light or something. I don't know. There's no way to verbalize this shit. And so on and so forth. You get up, and eventually you get to. It sort of seems to get darker and brighter at the same time, and more and less specificity at all. And then you get to the top, and you can kind of run up this and find it not in. I mean, it kind of primes the pump. You sort of are using imagination to sort of start doing this. But if you get skillful with this, you can actually follow the different degrees of density of your own experience, your own experiential fields. And notice, and the interesting thing about this is notice that all of these dimensions exist in their own mode, and they don't impinge on the neighboring modes.
Simultaneously. Simultaneously.
Yeah, the existence is simultaneous. It's always now, of course. But the light sound never impinges on light. Sound never impinges on thought. Thought never impinges on whatever. I mean, anybody could, in other words, each of these textural dimensions exists in its own mode, and its own logic, and its own dynamism, and its own everything. They're literally like different universes. But these are all subjective. These are all actual. I mean, they're within experience. And if you can kind of train yourself to become more sensitive to that and notice it, and kind of catalog it as it exists in this sort of more or less continuum of spectrum.
This is sort of to increase the sensitivity.
Yeah, and mainly you're training yourself in noticing to not smear them together. They coexist and they synchronistically manifest in step, but they don't impinge on each other. And with sloppy thinking, we're used to doing exactly the opposite of that. It's very common to think things are a certain way and then see them that way, or whatever. Whereas the thought is just a thought. It has nothing to do with what you see. It has nothing to do with what you hear, and so on and so forth.
Confusing correlation with causality kind of thing.
Yes. In general, it can be very useful to train in subtler dimensions of experience, simply because commonly most people are not educated in that, not encouraged in that. It's not pointed out as a reality to most people, but experientially it's a reality for everyone. And so rather than just sort of writing off vast amounts of experience that don't seem to be anything, you can look at them and see what they actually are. And there's a lot to be gleaned from that, because what they are and the way that they are that is modes of the way everything else is. It all reflects on each other. Different levels reflect on other levels, even though they don't, even though they differentiate in the way that they're modes, let's call it. It's much easier to do than to talk about. And you just play with it. It's like a game. It's like light. You sort of, it's like seeing ours. You kind of pretend you can do it and then just do it. And you learn how to do it by doing it. A good place to train in that is when you're going to sleep. And when you're going to sleep, just try and keep a small portion of your attention on what's appearing, what's happening. Because at first, you'll be there and you'll close your eyes and your senses are there and you're feeling your body on the bed and whatever. And then, you're thinking a few thoughts, but what are you seeing at that point? What sort of things are coming in the imagination? But, in different dimensions of just sort of vibes or whatever, we don't have words for this stuff, but what happens? What's going on there? What's coming in? The waking world is going out, but what is it that's coming in? And that's a very easy way to play with this stuff. And it's best approached, very lightly and playfully, just like a game, just sort of entertainment.
Does information come in packets?
No, information does not come in packets. The mind tries to put it into packets, and that's the essence of interpretive frameworks. Even very subtly and very abstractly.
Well, I saw one time packets of information strung on like a never-ending string.
Mm-hmm.
And it appeared that they were like packets or individual groups, and each group was never-ending.
Mm-hmm.
But they were all these, this never-ending string of packets. And I thought of like how energy comes in packets in chemistry and physics. I don't know if they have any sort of relationship to one another, but
I think the principal point of that kind of a vision is that they're never ending. So each of the packets is infinite. And in that infinity, that it is a packet is only a kind of like a symbolic, it's like an interface. It's like an icon of what it is. But in actuality, nothing is connected with anything else.
Well,
Things are
it's-
only unified by the fact of being radiant presence, but otherwise there's absolutely no unity. Reality is like an infinitely fractal, pointillist Big Bang.
In listening to you, that's what I got. It was all separate.
Yeah.
And when I tried to.
But there's infinite cross correlations and resonances, implicit resonances within the information. But they don't, it's not actually concretized.
Well, when I looked into it, and I couldn't look into it too far because everything was happening too fast.
Yeah.
It was like a news reel going really fast. But it didn't seem to have, each of the packets didn't seem to have any relationship to its brothers
Right.
in the
Right.
feed.
Right. Well, look, that could be a way of seeing perspectives too. So in the infinite field of chaotic, disconnected information, from within any perspective, there's various coherences through seeing alignments. And then you shift perspective, and all of a sudden there's a whole different set of alignments. And that's the way information organizes itself. I mean, with radiant presence, one of the very weird things about it, one of the confusing things about it, is how radically different it appears from different perspectives. And yet they're all these appearances are equally true. Neither of them is any more true or any less true than the other. So those packets may be sort of symbolic of these different perspectives, which gives it a kind of a pseudo-coherence. But the coherence is only an artifact of the perspective.
And I was confused of why I saw information. I mean, just information. And there was no emotional component to it. It was just information.
Well, that's a very high vision, because for there to be emotion in terms of anything that's identifiable as emotion, you would have to be taking the information and collapsing it down into a heavy-handed interpretation, and then the emotional reaction would be to those interpretations, rather than the information itself, which is the actual event. You know, reality is information, and it's infinite information, and it's infinitely meaningful and infinitely cross-connected, but completely disconnected. So, you know, it's very weird. I heard a very simple exercise is sit with your eyes closed, or when you're lying down going to sleep or something, and look at the faint light, the faint luminosity that appears on the inside of your eyelids, and notice how it's composed of inconceivable, countless, tiny little flashes of light that have absolutely no duration or stability, and they seem to form sort of quasi-patterns and cloud-like formations that'll drift in and out and morph into other things and all that. But all of that is just these inconceivably infinitesimal little flashes. And, you know, that's very much like what the fundamental structure of the radiance looks like from one perspective. From some perspectives, let's say.
It's very freeing to see that it doesn't have any connection
Yes.
with anything else.
Yes, because that undermines the interpretive frameworks, which is the sole thing that can cause seeming entrapment. When you see that the interpretations have no objective basis, then there's nothing. There's nothing to entrap, and there's nothing to be entrapped. It's just a field of dancing lights. I mean, that's one way to sort of clearly and quasi-structurally point out the way in which there's nothing here. You know, I sometimes say there's nothing here, and I mean that literally. But this indicates the basis for that there's this infinitesimal flashes of radiance, of energy, of light, what have you, whatever you want to call it, that are not connected, and yet form the ultimate Rorschach blot for free associating cross connections and entities and conditions and situations, which of course is exactly what we do. And typically we only notice the associations and don't pay attention to the fact that they're just imaginative projections on something that is not actually like that.
Do you think the main reason for us drawing these interpretive frameworks from something that doesn't have one, do you think it's fear-based mainly?
I think it's, well, it certainly can look like that from one aspect. What I think, that question can't be answered. But what I think, my personal opinion, I think that reality has a profound desire to know itself. And it tries every means at its disposal to do so. And strangely, it seems to fall into rather naive, simplistic mechanisms in an attempt to see if that'll do the trick. And I think that most sort of human delusive modes of this heavy-handed interpretive frameworks is a manifestation of that mode of approaching it. And I think yoga is sort of riding the wave of it discovering more and more subtle ways of being with itself until it can be with itself more nakedly as as what it actually is. This, which is too subtle and too nonlinear to be, and too unsolvable to be approached in terms of these interpretive frameworks. I mean, it's a good try. It's very ingenious and it's very potent. Obviously, look how easily people get sucked into them. It's convincing. As far as it goes, it just doesn't go very far enough, unfortunately. So I think of it as radiant presence as the mature best shot of trying to get a handle on what it is. It's like it's looking at itself in the mirror and it doesn't know what it's seeing. So it's trying to pull all that together into, what am I looking at here? And one of the modes that it tries to use to answer that question is, well, maybe I'm looking at a room full of people sitting in chairs. It seems viable. Might be. It kind of looks as if it could be that. It's arguable. But then you look closer. If you have the wherewithal to look closer, which seemingly most people don't bother. I mean, that doesn't really stand up.
It almost seems like it's trying to find permanence in an impermanent state.
Yeah, sure.
You just can't do it.
Well, if it's trying to answer the question, what am I? If it could come up with an actual answer, that would be a real clue. So, and permanence, if there were permanence, then that might enable that possibility.
Sure.
When it's stymied by the fact that simplistic approach isn't quite going to cut it, it's like, oh, I guess I better go back to the drawing board and try something else.
The metaphor that I'm getting listening to you is like we have limited bandwidth. And so we're getting this huge amount of data coming in, but we have to limit it. We're selecting out what data we're going to use to construct this reality, this apparent reality, or like the images of a dream, for whatever we think we're going to get out of that. But eventually that bandwidth, maybe, I guess that's my question. Does that bandwidth expand? Does it, as you perceive that as being less substantial, does that allow more data into the bandwidth? Or as it dissolves, does then the notion of excluded and included data dissolve?
No, I think it's not like that. I think that it's always full bandwidth, but that it tries a mode of censorship of, I'm looking at all this, most of it doesn't make any sense, but if I restrict myself to this portion, then I can use that as a basis for something that maybe makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
And here there's a world and there's entities and there's interaction, there's functioning and all that,
Right.
which is all very well and good until you get honest with yourself and notice, yeah, but what about all the rest of the bandwidth that is clearly here
Mhm.
and is excluding and pretending it's not here really a viable strategy? And in the long range, of course, it isn't. So I think that the bandwidth is always there. It's just kind of strategically being denied, being censored out of the universe of discourse, and for the purpose of having a strategy that seems to work.
Mhm.
You know,
The idea of focus.
yeah. But it's using focus to stack the deck in your favor, to throw out anything that doesn't fit. And I'll take these portions of the bandwidth because they kind of fit in with my version of what I'm trying to construct out of it. And I'm discarding all the rest of this stuff, which is just I'm calling noise in the system because relative to the system I'm trying to construct, it is noise. But it's not noise. It's
So-
real.
So we could get more rigid and more focused and more exclusive. It's not probably very satisfying, but we can try it, or we can become more relaxed and let the data be itself, and then have like you were saying, a sense of discovery, like well that's that's that, and that's that too, and have it relaxing to dissolving, I guess you could say.
It's a more mature mode of looking to see what it is and let it show you what it is, rather than trying to heavy-handedly tell it what you think it is because you think you can pull it off.
Mhm.
And manifestly, functionally, we see examples of all of this in human behavior. I mean, look at fundamentalists and fear-based subcultures and so on and so forth. They're all panicking, trying to make it tighter and smaller and more certainly, yes, this is how it is, and electing maniacs to the White House and so on and so forth. I said no politics, didn't I? I lied. That's not politics. That's truth. That's fact. That's history.
That's kind of a given, no matter who's in the office.
Well, you make a good point there.
So this looking function of radiant presence that is looking into itself or trying to discover itself, that's different than what we think of as the witness or insight.
Well, it's what any of those actually is.
And so it'll manifest as that. In other words, the looking function could manifest in a variety of different ways.
It can appear to be a variety of different ways. Again, remember that it looks very different depending on sort of the perspective in which it's observed. And I don't mean spatial perspective. I just mean sort of I don't know what I mean. I don't think I could possibly say what I mean. But anyway, it can look very different depending upon how it's seen.
Just listening to you and trying to do a rap. What keeps coming up for me is that at a core level that presence is very ecstatic.
Yes, presence is certainly ecstatic.
And I really got that really clear at one point where I was really dealing with original sin.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just, something came through. It's like I was really questioning it. And it's like, no, it's really original ecstasy. And then that really came through really strong.
Yeah.
And then listening to what you were saying these last few moments, I feel like that presence doesn't mind feeling lost, and it just takes great joy in being found again. So no matter what's going on, it's like playing hide and seek with itself, just having a wonderful time.
Yeah, presence loves the shit out of itself. Presence is completely intoxicated with itself. It just thinks it's the coolest thing there is, and it's right. It's drunk on itself. It's in love with itself. It's lust with itself, with a transcendental sexuality that's beyond anything. I mean, all these yab-yam images, that's just an expression of that. Reality is just wants to fuck itself continually and just, oh, this is the best.
Including like all the painful experiences too.
Yeah, it's just rough, rough play. To pursue that metaphor, which is rapidly revealing itself as rather paltry. And this is part of the reason why, successful yoga realization, true spirituality, is so beautiful, because it's intrinsically a clearer and clearer discovery and revelation of this fundamental ecstasy that this is. It's inalienable. It can't not be that. It's invulnerable. It's adamantine. It's Teflon. And how nice to find pure transcendental pleasure that can't wane, it can't diminish, it can't possibly be less.
Years ago when I did the drug ecstasy, that's what I experienced. Everything was breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was, it was just, that's why I wanted to keep doing it.
Well, sure, duh.
And this woman who was directing, she was doing like a creative counseling with it to open our heart chakra and do whatever, and release all this stuff. And it was just fascinating because she said that our natural state of being is ecstasy.
Yeah.
And so when I was on a walk this afternoon, I was just walking, I was going, there's not even a I or a me, this is just life, having a love affair with life.
Yes, life loves life.
Yeah.
And that's all there is. This is life loving life.
It's a little bit frustrating being a human being now, because to be around people who think like I do and feel like I do, I just feel like I was telling Claiborne, I feel like I'm like on a different planet, because there's not very many people who are.
Well, you are. You're on a different planet from people who think they're human beings. But they aren't really human beings. They just don't know it. They're pod people. They're pod people. They're still in the chrysalis. They're still caterpillars. They're butterflies, but they don't know it because they're caterpillars.
And then I'm the weird one. I'm woo-woo, and I'm out there, and I'm just full of love.
Well, they may think you're weird, but that doesn't make you weird, of course. Seemingly in the present situation, it's very, very rare to have people that are having a kind of, even vague, let alone clear understanding of this stuff. And that's, who knows why that seems to be like that, but hey, there you go.
Do you know anything about this man said that it's all in the brain, it's a conceptual overlay, it's a mental fabrication.
What it's all?
That all of this, that who we are is just in the brains, that it's a mental, that it's projection, that we're just projecting, the brain is just projecting.
Yeah, that's what I've been talking about, interpretive frameworks, interpretation.
Okay.
It's mind interprets it Mind tells a story, a narration of what's happening, whereas all that's really present is inconceivable energy. So you look in your field of vision and all you see is light and color and shape. There's no labels, there's no names. But then the mind comes along and slices and dices and draws an outline around this and says that's a person, draws an outline around this and says that's a cup, draws an outline around this and says that's a glass, and so on and so forth. And so the mind is labeling all that and telling the story that this is this and that's that, and they're different from each other, and they are certain things, and they have certain histories, and they behave in certain ways, and they have certain interrelationships, blah, 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 curriculum, but it's all mental, it's all a mental overlay on something that is fundamentally unknown in those context, in that context. And that's how it is, that's how experience is. And so believing your own interpretations is what is technically called delusion in spirituality. Or in practical terms, it means being a crazy person. Because you're thinking things are not the way they actually are, which is pretty much the definition of nuts, as far as I can tell, from my amateurish perspective. You see some guy saying, I am Napoleon, and what happens? He gets locked up in a mental institution. Because he's not Napoleon, unless he happens to be Napoleon, in which case that's really interesting. But the chances are good, in most cases he isn't, in which case he thinks he is, so he's nuts. And anyone who thinks they're anyone is nuts, because no one knows who they are. I am who I am at the moment I was born. Who was I? Who was I then? Vastness. Nothing changed. No one came along with a magic wand and changed me. All that happened is a bunch of people spewing lies at me. And in my innocence, I said, okay, I'll play that game. I'm Peter Brown. I'm here. I'm in this body. But it's all mental. All of that only exists conceptually in the mind.
Wild and crazy game.
Wild and crazy. These humans know how to have fun, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
In a twisted, perverse, painful kind of way.
Plot twist.
Seems to make it easier if there's a intellectual congruence with accepting that. Then it seems like that can be a nice baseline for an individual to go into more direct experience.
Well, yeah, if you resist it, you suffer. At least that's my experience.
Yeah. Or if you resist even thinking about this,
Hey.
then when it does pop into your world, it can be really disorienting.
Hey, you've heard resistance is futile.
I couldn't hear you.
Resistance is futile.
Yeah, there you go.
You will be assimilated.
The board. Yep. Great metaphor.
It's kind of like a kaleidoscope, it just keeps.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, that's what the energy is like. It's like kaleidoscope. It's like infinite kaleidoscopes within kaleidoscopes within kaleidoscopes. That's the truth.
I remember feeling like that when I was little, and I was just amazed that everybody around me wasn't amazed. And it was just like, wow, you guys, look. I'm like, yeah.
You were just a live one, that's all.
So if radiant presence is so intent on discovering itself, then there really isn't anything to worry about. It's gonna
Correct.
just keep
Correct.
being in the process of doing that.
Yep, eternally, beyond time.
But it's interesting, over the weekend, you've mentioned ways in which the yogi takes advantage in an artful and intelligent way, certain opportunities.
Yeah, there's hidden passages.
Mhm.
There's ways to break the rules. There's fine print you can take advantage of. It's like a tax law where, according to the tax law, you're supposed to pay $100,000, blah blah. And you read the blah 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 bullshit boilerplate, and you get to the bottom of this tiny little thing. But by the way, you don't really have to pay it.
Right.
And so the yogi reads all the fine print and gets to that one and says, "Wait a minute, I'm invoking that clause." So Radiant Presence comes along and says, "I'm just going to dance with myself sloppily for eons and eons and lifetimes eternally, and just wallow through all kinds of shit and what fun." And the yogi comes along and says, "Yeah, okay, but if I take advantage of the fact that it's possible to cut to the chase and discover what Radiant Presence is directly, I get liberation, I get infinite bliss and joy, I get the whole package, and there's no rules that say you can't." Or you can just say, "Nah, I won't bother. I'm just going to go out there and get in a fight with someone who has different political opinions with me and beat the shit out of each other. That sounds like more fun." And that's what the majority of people would rather do. But the yogi will sit back and scratch your head and say, "Wait a minute, it's kind of a choice you can make." I mean, you don't really make the choice. You make the choice by your nature makes the choice. If you're the kind of person that sees that and jumps on it, then you're yogi. You don't get anything that you don't already have, and you don't get anything that everything isn't going to get. But you're kind of you're short-circuiting it and jumping to the back of the book instead of laboriously going through each of the infinite number of pages till you get there. But just because you can, and if you want to, you want to. Most people don't. And that's cool. It's all good. It's not like anything's really at stake. There's no downside. It's just some of us are quirky that way. Some of us are perverse enough, if you like, to want to cheat the system. There's a lot of ways to sort of look at it and spin it. But what it gets down to is it's possible. If it's possible for you, it's possible. And then if you have inclination to take advantage of that possibility, then you're free to do so.
I think that the participatory nature of engaging in this has been really confusing for me.
Mhm.
But I'm just kind of realizing that that's also some unresolvable, that aspect itself doesn't really go down to free will or no free will. It's just kind of this confusion that you experience.
Yeah,
there.
It's just this ongoing confusing stumbling around, having a go at it, giving it your best shot from moment to moment. And it looks the way it looks. After the fact, you can look back on it and say, "Oh, it was this or it was that." But then, it's all spin doctoring. End of the day, everyone's just bumbling along doing shit.
It's nice to feel empowered that that's okay.
Yeah, that's a relief.
It's totally. Well, it's not just okay. Try to do anything else. You have to be bullshitting and making a claim that you are, which will not stand up to scrutiny, because you are.
Right,
It's very exhausting.
It'd be very weird to teach kindergarten though, and to, the one message you better learn here is that you're confused, and it's going to always be that way.
I don't know if it might be wonderful.
Yeah.
It might be absolutely wonderful.
Right.
Teacher, I don't know what's going on. I don't either. I think it might be lunchtime. You feel like lunch? I'm hungry.
just had lunch. Let's do it again.
Sounds like real life to me.
Dinner then.
It seems like if you look for something that you'll always find information that's contradictory to
Yeah.
whatever you're looking for, and then it's just like endless
Yeah,
and back and forth.
yeah, endless confusion, endless mishmash. You can never know where you are, or know what's happening, or know what you're doing, or know why you're doing it, or even if you're doing it. And which actually is very empowering, because you have freedom to fuck up. You have freedom to just, I don't know, I think I'm doing this, and
Yeah, and the freedom feels.
so you're not trapped in your own process. You're not trapped by your own rules of, no, I'm trying to do this, and that means I have to do that. You know, so you can improvise. There's room for genius. There's room for inspiration.
Seems like if you're really clear, there's nowhere to go. That takes a lot of heat off.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, that's
Relax.
of the essence. You know, that's primal. That's seeing the radiance, seeing radiant presence.
And then relaxing with not being able to describe it. That's part of the yogic path too, it appears.
Yeah, because again, that's an aspect of radiant presence. I mean, basically, as you tune into any aspect of radiant presence, it liberates you across the board in terms of relaxing, in terms of not getting caught up in a lot of bullshit, you know, in every which way. So that's why the path of yoga simply becomes tuning into any aspect of radiant presence and notice the way that it is what it is, which is contradictory to what people usually hold things to be. And just in that revelation, that noticing, you'll be empowered to be free of all that. Because it conveys that it's not like that. So you don't have to sweat it. You don't actually, you know, all of this difficult and problematic things are not real. They don't really exist. So all of a sudden you're free of that by degrees.
That sounds like the heart of creativity to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly if is an aspect of high level creativity, sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, true artistry is expressing this, you know, this transcendental, outside of structure, outside of rules, liveliness.
Mm-hmm.
The more something is following structures or rules, the less it is, you know, creative in an artistic sense.
Yeah.
And so it's like this notion of bringing everything onto the path, as though any one thing is the portal into the direct experience of.
Yes, and anything that is actually present in your experience is a doorway to
Full experience.
to revelation.
Yes.
Any actual experience is a doorway to the revelation of the actual nature of what it is, because it's displaying what it is if you have the wherewithal to look more closely. If you gloss over and just hold it to be what your mind has been holding it to be, then you're probably not inclined to look closer and notice the way it actually isn't that. It's actually something else quite amazing and quite wonderful. But anything, there's absolutely no holds barred. There's nothing that's not it. Everything is radiant presence. So therefore, anything whatsoever is a doorway into actuality.
Which gives us a very real way to practice in
It's
the course
very
of our
real.
daily life. Yes.
It's very real. Just any time, at any moment whatsoever,
Yes.
you can hit on any aspect of your experience and check it out and get some wow factor out of that. And just in that, without trying to draw conclusions or make sense of it or say, what just happened? Just the event itself is transformative.
And as you say, then has the effect of liberating
Yes.
everything.
It liberates everything. It may be cumulative. It may seem to take a while, you know, sort of historically or karmically, but in actual fact, it's inestimably powerful. And these moments of flashes may seem like nothing. It's like, oh, so that's fun, but it wasn't much. But don't underestimate that. It's supremely powerful and will really undermine samsara.
That's the metaphor, I think, in Tojo, the idea that if you do the practice, you become the body of light. You've dematerialized in a way. You've chipped away at the reification.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a metaphor, but you know, the idea that it's there's some kind of cumulative effect.
Yeah. Well, it seems that way in practice. In fact, every moment of revelation is the total revelation, and yet it has perhaps a large habitual backlog of investment in interpretation to work against. So it may be that total revelation wasn't sufficient to completely undermine the whole edifice, but just those moments of revelation are cumulative, and they will undermine the edifice.
And the total revelation is no more powerful. It's the same total revelation, total revelation.
Yeah, always.
But if we're going against the massive edifice, it might seem like a mosquito. You know, it's barely noticeable, and eventually it's just, you know, the last.
In that context, but from the context of the revelation, the whole edifice seems like a mosquito. A lifelong habit of bondage and suffering and you know, heavy-handed emotional investment in angst-filled identification. This is time.
Peter, it seems like talking about structure and how if you look more carefully, you see what we think of as structure doesn't have coherence.
Yes.
What's interesting is that I was thinking about music and how you look at like harmony, and there's a sense there that there's a kind of a structure of, it seems built into sound itself, even tones, you know, where they'll seem to consistently produce these harmonics that have its own kind of exquisite, like incomprehensible structure, you could say. It's not, it doesn't feel quite true to say that that's the same as just pure static or noise or chaos. Like there's something else, even our capacity to understand seemingly language and have the conversation that we're having here together doesn't seem the same as just a mishmash of random sounds without any meaning somehow. Those don't seem equivalent in a certain way, even if maybe we could say ultimately they are, in the sense that you still can't pinpoint what they are in a definitive way. But it still seems like there's a kind of and maybe this is just my own still not looking carefully enough to what appears to be some kind of structures are not actually structured.
The apparent structures like the harmonies and dissonance, the degree of harmony and dissonance of musical intervals, for example. You know, where the intervals go, you know, the fifths are perfect harmonies, and then so on and so forth. It's a matter of alignment. It's rather like I saw it on Facebook or something, the photograph of this wonderful art installation this guy had done. And he had this room basically full of garbage. You walk in the room and he's got, upended rusty wheelbarrows and just crap piled in this room. And at this one point in the room, there was a rod rising from the floor with a little ring on it. And so you walk around the room and there's just all this crap and you're wading through this garbage. It's literally garbage. It's like from a landfill or something. But if you get over to this pole and you look exactly the alignment, the pole is fixed in the floor, and you look right through that ring, the alignment, all of that garbage pulls itself up into an absolutely perfect bust, like a sculptural bust, with nothing out of place. Like it was carved in marble, absolutely perfect and pristine, inconceivable, mind blowing. I don't remember who it was of, but it was there's a particular camera showed what it looks like from this angle and this angle, and I think I'm looking at this angle, all of a sudden, bang! There's this amazing coherence. And I think of, say, for example, speech versus noise. So I can be saying this, or I can be and the noise that is speech seems like speech if you observe it from a certain perspective.
Mhm.
From another perspective, it's noise.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think that the harmonies of music, first of all. Let me see if I can put this a little more presumably. Let me think about that. It's basically geometry. Which is still a free association on a conceptual free association on form, because the perfect forms, manifest forms, don't exist. So perfect harmonies don't exist because real world harmonics are imperfect. They have imperfect harmonics. There's no actual pure tones possible by degree. So the harmonies that are heard are glossing over us and censoring the portions of the timbre which are not harmonious.
Which are deviating somewhat from the
exactly.
pure tone,
Yeah.
so-called pure tone.
Yeah, and it may be, a very slight thing,
right.
but it's a fundamental and actual thing in the scale of things. And I think geometry is like that. You look at, the relationship of a circumference to the diameter, and you look at triangles and look at all that stuff. But in the real world, there's no triangles, there's no circles. There's approximations of it which are never perfect, never actually circular. The idea of an actual circle is only an idea, it's only a concept. It doesn't exist except as an idea. There's resonances of that, approximations that can be seen from certain perspectives in forms that are not actually that.
Sure, I mean, even as we were saying earlier, someone else might come into the room and hear what you're saying, and it may just sound like gibberish.
Exactly. Most people, I'm sure. Sometimes I think it sounds like gibberish.
So there would be like, what are you talking about? Structure and coherence. This is completely incoherent.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's
coherence.
Right. So yes.
No coherence here. That's
so what we think of as perspective and some degree of structure, what we think of as some degree of structure and meaningfulness, order and harmony, or some kind of coherence, is actually purely the perspective from which it's being seen.
Yeah,
brings that.
And there can be degrees of it. Certainly, there can be heavy-handed degrees, but they aren't actually that if you include the whole that is actually manifest.
Right.
It all deviates. It's an interesting point, and I think that it would probably. I'll think about that. I think it would bear some investigation. I hadn't thought about that in particular, and it is a very interesting point. But I know that fundamentally, there is no structure. Fundamentally, there is no coherence. And so the relationship of even extreme degrees of apparent coherence to actuality is always that the coherence is somehow an artifact of perspective, because it's not actually that. Even though it can be very much that, it can be very approximately that, but it's not actually that.
And that's because when you go to try to find the patterns that make up the seen structure, you can't resolve those patterns, basically.
I didn't follow that.
Well, if you say that something is appearing in a way that looks structured, let's say whether it's sound or vision, that is constituted by, let's just say, some sort of patterning of I don't know what,
Well,
information. we were
Yeah,
talking
it's an
about.
overlay on information, which may be approximately that, but isn't exactly that. And it's what it exactly is, that is the essence in terms of yoga. Approximations are fine, and most humans spend their entire lives oriented to nothing but. And, great, have at it. There's nothing wrong with approximations, but they are not liberating because they're not ultimately true.
So even if you go into a pattern, like listening to a so-called perfect fifth, a harmonic, when you listen to that, and it has its sense of a kind of coherence and a structure, and then you actually feel into what that actually is in a sense, or what that's made of experientially, you end up with, you can't find the structure.
Yeah.
Even though it's showing up as this beautiful structure.
Well, you hear it as that, but the actuality is only an approximation of that. Well, you play guitar, right? So you know, try and play a guitar in perfect tune.
Right.
You can make it very much in tune. I mean, I'm an expert at tuning guitars, but they're never in tune. They'll sound in tune, but if you really, 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 really listen, it's not. And so again, actuality is made of specifics. Generalities don't exist. And again, it's not that generalities are evil. Most human interaction and orientation is in terms of generalities, and it works fine as far as it goes. If you call this working fine. Sorry, no politics.
That's politics on a different level.
But for liberation, the power is in seeing what it really, really actually is, verifiably at any scale of examination. You get all kinds of amazing apparent readouts when you sort of soften the focus and let yourself be with it more loosely. But if you really just get down to details, then you see what it is, and it turns out that is supremely powerful.
It feels like the details, though, are, I don't know, I can't seem to find the details.
Well, you can't find them, and the fact that you can't find them is the revelation of unresolvability. Because you can't find them not as a failing of you looking, you can't find them because they themselves are not precise. They're sloppy, they're fuzzy, they're blurry. And then you discover that reality is sloppy and fuzzy and blurry, and isn't that interesting? What's up with that?
So it's never really specific. It's always general.
No, it's specifically unresolvable. It's very precisely and very specifically unresolvable.
It's generally clear.
It's generally clear. Yeah. If you look very closely and very precisely at anything that's clear, you'll discover that it's not.
And it's really hard to wrap our head around that.
True, it's true.
Yeah.
But this is not conceptual.
No.
It's totally pragmatic. Look for yourself and you'll see.
But the way that I'm self-generating this reality, the only way I can really get my head around that is to see how I do that in the dream state.
Uh-huh.
In an
True.
incredibly precise way in the dreams,
Yeah.
and obviously the sounds in the dreams, I'm not a musician myself, but I've played amazing guitar in my dreams,
Sure.
that perfect note, and that's just being generated by my projection.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then it's interesting because all of that dream projection is coming out of what material? There's no material even there there's no pixels in my mind that are being reorganized.
Well, but the intelligence, first of all, there's nothing but a constant, infinite radiation of pixels, of essentially what can become pixels, can sufficiently be pixels. And the intelligence is inestimably powerful. The intelligence, it's doing all this. Jesus Christ, this is impressive as hell to me.
Right. And like, I have a little dog that I adore, and it does the same damn thing. I mean, it's generating a massively complex, realistic world.
The one-cell bacteria in your gut are doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's creating me.
Probably the atoms that those bacteria are made of are doing the same thing, right? Who knows? I used to be into microscopes when I was a young teenager, and I would in a microscope and I would get a drop of pond butter or something and put it under there and look at it, and it just the butter looks kind of clear and you look at it, it's just tiny little critters flitting around, and I would look closely trying to see what shape they were, and I would look really close at the edges of them, and there were always rainbows, and so I would look closer, and there were more rainbows, and the rainbows had rainbows. And take your finger, and look very closely. Exactly. I mean, of course, as we get older, it's good fucking luck. But take your finger and just try and find exactly where the edge of it is. I mean, I see the edge. It's right here, right? The edge. It's very obvious, very clear. But really, get very precise. Find exactly where the edge is. It's fuzzy. It's fuzzy. Everything is fuzzy.
You have 20/20 vision.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a new campaign slogan for the war on drugs. So don't do drugs, just get a microscope.
Don't you guys just do yoga? The most dangerous drug of all.
Well, when you mentioned it's going to be Miller time a while ago, my first thought was, well, how does that relate to intoxicants in yoga? And obviously there's a lot of people, the sadhus in India, and all the sacramental use of intoxicants and stuff.
And not so sacramental.
Right, the fine line between use and abuse. But it seems like, so that's kind of, I guess for me, something that's always kind of intriguing at the edge of my potential, because I've kind of been a teetotaler in terms of drugs for like 35 plus years, and quite happily. But then there's part of me that's kind of like, well, what are you missing? And it just seems like the role of
it's easy to find out, my boy. Here, try this.
So it's kind of neither here nor there. It's kind of.
Of course, it's just another mode of radiance. Intoxication is another mode of radiance. Disease is another mode of radiance.
Yeah.
Extreme radical behaviors is another mode of radiance.
I think for me, maybe the use of drugs created more confusion, which I was trying to get away from.
Like when you were young and foolish.
Yeah. So maybe, if creating confusion it might be a good thing. It's like, okay, yeah, just.
You'll create confusion and you won't be any more confused than you ever were.
Right. It's like homeopathic, let's be confused.
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of great yogis have been into intoxicants, and what the hell, why not? They're fun. Yogis aren't necessarily, sticks in the mud. Not necessarily all old maids, They like a good time as much as the next bloke. But look at Trump. I mean, he was a well-known alcoholic. I think it's very common. There's all sorts of, people into physical pleasures, intoxication, all sorts of things. I mean, it's a sort of a Puritan, simplistic idea that for some reason that should be a problem or is some special area of experience or behavior that requires special control and so on and so forth.
It seems like a good chunk of the time spent in humanity is around finding these structures, whether it's music and art, but I think more so in so-called science, for whatever useful purposes, whether it's saving lives or making money or whatever.
Absolutely.
But
it's a dominant human game.
Yeah, and it seems like everything we're talking about here is orthogonal pretty much to that. It's whatever you want to do with that, it has nothing to do with any of that necessarily. There's no right way to interpret the world. It's all.
Yeah, it does no, it's not, none of that is antagonistic to yoga. None of it just has nothing to do with it one way or the other. You know, the fact that mind generates patterns and that the fact that these patterns can be used in various game structures, like business and so on and so forth, is just simply a fact. The important thing isn't whether or not they exist or whether or not they're happening, whether or not you're participating. The important thing is seeing what it actually is. It doesn't matter what happens or what you do. What matters is seeing what it is. And then whether you do it or not, you're not entrapped by it because you know it's radiant presence.
And whatever you do is just following your inclination.
First. And there's no reason to suppress that, unless it's your nature to suppress your own nature. You know, if your intrinsic nature is somehow perversive and self-undermining, then you might have urges and your inclination is to suppress them. But even that is like, well, so you're a very complex person, but you're still very present. And all that complexity is neither here nor there. You know, or you're a very moral person, or you're an immoral person, or you're, you know, whatever, you're a congenital liar, whatever. It's like, all of that is neither here nor there. The point isn't what to do about that. The point is to see what it is. And you're free to try and do something about it. If you're an alcoholic and you don't like it, you're free to join AA. You know, have at it. Or not. But that has nothing to do with yoga.
Because it seems like a lot of so-called spiritual paths are about finding better structures of
Yeah.
meditation.
But that's not spirituality, that's just lifestyle upgrade. You're trying to upgrade your interpretive framework to a better one. But that, and again, that's fine. By all means, have at it. You can improve your life all you want. But you're also free to practice yoga or not. And the two have nothing to do with each other.
And the seeming commonalities between disparate paths, evolutionary, spiritual structures are just seemings.
Everything's a seeming. I mean, nothing can be found. Nothing can be analyzed. Nothing can be explained. Nothing can be parsed in terms of what it is or how it is or that or what it's made of or what it's doing. Ultimately. And ultimately is really all we have. Anything less than ultimately is a fabrication, is a pretense.
In this context, I'd like to say that my drift is that the simpler I make my life, the simpler I walk through this world, the more open I am to the beauty of the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hungry for more experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems to me like that if it's made complex, that looks exhausting to me.
Yeah.
You know, to see individuals that just do things that seem to trip themselves up. And I'm not in judgment of it. I'm just kind of in awe that someone could make their life complicated.
I can relate. I have a very similar kind of an attitude, but I feel that we have a similar energy in that regard. Yeah. Well, on the other hand, some people might have a nature where it is their nature to be complex.
Yeah.
And in that case, they're not actually. It's not a problem for them. It's just it's them being what they are. Like cactuses have thorns. You know, and a daisy can look at the cactus and say, "God, why does that plant have all those damn thorns all over it?
Sure.
Someone's gonna get hurt."
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're a cactus, you have thorns. if you're something else, you're something else. And people are so different. I mean, I just keep discovering. I was never a people person in my life, but as I've been, over the past decade or so, as I've been doing this, working with people, I'm just astounded how unique everyone is. People who, the idea that we're all more or less the same is just so untrue. People are so unique and so complete. Everyone's a complete one-off. Yeah, it's amazing.
And yet we're all the same.
Yeah, but we are all the same. But sort of functionally, we're all completely different. As in our manifestation, in our sort of karmic expression, what have you. Should we take a 5-minute break?
15 minutes.
See you in 15 minutes.
Please. 20 minutes, 5 minutes. Peter, would you say there's patterns in music in the sense I was thinking when we were having a discussion a little earlier. When I built that framework, I learned about the harmonic overtones and the sympathetic resonance. And sympathetic resonance is fascinating because it looks like there's a coherence that when you vibrate this string, it makes the fifth vibrate next, and then the third. It's a very interesting. So did you call that patterning?
Yeah, music's all patterning. Music's nothing but patterning.
Yeah. Nothing but patterning. But in some ways, it seems like the idea of natural occurrences that you try to describe the feeling of a fifth, of a so-called perfect fifth, only fifth. It's a little different than I was trying to think of the sympathetic resonance of the physical occurrence. It seems like it's playing off of itself, plays another.
Yeah, well, it's the flavors of frequency ratios. The flavors of the elements. It's interesting. It's very interesting. Why an octave is the same flavor double, and it has the same flavor, but a fifth is the same flavor half again. And that has a flavor. Play a fifth at different notes, it still has the same flavor because it's the ratio that you're hearing. And yeah, it's fascinating.
You like all those sympathetic strings on your sarong?
Yeah.
How many sympathetic strings are there?
And the sarong is just 42 strings, and you're only playing 3 of them. And all the other strings are just, oh, it sounds like a beehive. It sounds like a Taj Mahal when it's tuned up properly. It's the tune, as you might imagine. But they're pretty stable. Once you get a good instrument, once you get it tuned up, it doesn't drift too much. Just requires a little touch up.
And they're steel strings or metallic strings.
The plank strings are cut. The rest are all steel or brass.
So they probably change a little more than the other ones or something?
Yes. Oh, cool.
Now it's hot.
Oh, what a good idea. I never thought of that. I didn't remember
It's
that.
easier than doing a before and after.
Oh, yeah, no, but I think
This is very, very good.
I have static.
I wonder if that battery's dying. Maybe, let me just see if.
Seems to have plenty of, oh, no, it's somehow it was, I think it's fine. It's plenty of can. I think the way I have it clipped differently. Somehow that's.
Well,
Maybe it was,
I haven't had it touch for some reason. There we go, that seems to be a little better.
that's good.
All right, we're on the home stretch.
Here we are.
I thought we were already home. Okay.
What does that even mean?
I know. Oh, just yanking your leg.
Hmm. I would say, sort of tactically, it's best not to try to sum this stuff up for yourself. Just leave it as, leave it as what? I don't know, what just happened? What's this about? Just sort of leave it open-ended, because that resonates more truly with the flavor of what it is. It's a natural tendency of mind to want to sort of pull things together, and it's fine, and you don't need to suppress that. The mind is going to tend to do that, and that's in that activity will occur. But just in terms of how you're sitting with it, just sitting in sort of is a something, maybe it's not.
It's not.
I mean, it's very wise to treat all this stuff as if it's gibberish, and if none of it is true. Because then at the end, we go through a whole weekend like this, and it's like, what just happened? What was that about? Why did I come to this? It's kind of fun, I think. Was it?
The reverse idea of fun.
And who doesn't?
During the break, we were talking and we kind of got on to the final point of, the final impediment to enlightenment is attachment to emptiness. You have to let go of the attachment to emptiness. And my thought was, well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with being attached to radiant presence. I mean, at some level, it's like it's radiant presence being attached to itself. I mean, there's this sense of, like obsessed with itself. And I had an experience a few years ago when I sold a house that I had built as a young person, and I'd lived there 25 years, and I was driving off with a final pickup truck of stuff, and my 11-year-old daughter looked over at me and said, "Dad, I didn't think you wanted to leave." And I was feeling euphoric, and she goes, "You look really happy." And I said, "Yes, I just realized that I thought I was attached to living here, but I just realized I'm attached to living, and I can live anywhere." And it was like this sense of total, relief and freedom. But the idea that there was always going to be some kind of a bond, or joy in the living and in the action of living.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, it seems like maybe are those old Buddhist texts that say, well, you got to get rid of your attachment to enlightenment? That sounds wrong to me.
Yeah, it's wrong. It's wrong because there's no such thing as attachment. Good yoga reveals that there is no such thing as attachment. So then whether you're attached or not is just spin doctoring, and who cares? You see what attachment is. Well, of course, what it naturally is radiant present. So how can, so what can you say about it after you said that? What can you say about it? That its attachment is itself interpretation, which is itself, delusion, such as it is. I mean, that attachment is a construct.
Mhm.
That emptiness is a construct. That you're attached to emptiness is a construct. That you're not attached to emptiness is a construct. That you realize it's a construct. That you're deluded is a construct.
Well, couldn't you say you're attached to a false idea of yourself? A belief, a false belief?
Sure, you can say that, but, a false belief of yourself isn't really a belief. And the attachment isn't really attachment. It's all just an unfathomable transcendental energy event, apparitionally appearing in experience. Yoga frees you from everything, not by stopping it, but by showing you what it is, and it turns out not to be a problem. So all your attachment and all your delusion and all your obsessiveness and all of your self-loathing and all of your psychological twistedness and all of your dysfunction and all of your failure is pure transcendental light. Really is. And the context in which it's not that is constructed. And in short, it's a fantasy. Now, mind you, that you have a fantasy like that, and that the mind has hypnotized itself to have it feel that's real, if that's the case, is an interesting circumstance. But then you have yoga to look into that circumstance, and successful exercise of yoga will reveal that circumstance isn't an actual circumstance, it's a fantasy. Simply because the actual circumstance is unfathomable. And so that description of it won't stand up. It's not. You can't find anything that's actually like that. So therefore, the reaction to it it melts because there's no it to react to. It's something else. Everything is something else, and that something else is not anything. You're not negating it. It's just not what you think it is.
That's inseparability. There's never been separation.
Sure.
Apparently, it seems presence in its play with itself says, I wonder what it would be like to see to be separate. And then that is our persona playing out that particular whim or play.
Well, separateness is an artifact of unresolvability. It cannot resolve whether or not it's separate. So separateness is a viable hypothesis. Inclusion is a viable hypothesis, but you can't find either. You can't find oneness and you can't find manyness. You can't find separation and you can't find inclusion. You literally can't find them. They don't stand up. They can seem to be there, but if you look closely, it doesn't resolve to being there.
Just concepts.
Yeah, they're concepts.
An attachment goes in that same.
Yeah, exactly. Attachment's another concept.
Yeah.
Because all it really is a transcendental energy flavor, and you can't find what it is. You can't even find if it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unresolvability is a solvent that melts everything and anything.
It's the end times.
It's the end times for the microphone. Okay, you're going to hear what I really sound like. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking.
So Peter, in parting, are there any suggestions you would leave us with?
Party on, dudes, be excellent to each other.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
There you go. Words of wisdom.
Not yogic advice, but not bad advice anyway.
That's what he's gonna do anyway.
Well, I know. Preaching to the choir here.
Doesn't apply to the rest of us.
Well, the best advice is just forget about all this stuff and just look at your being. Be with your being, your being. Check out your being. Your being is the fountain of all delight. The being is your fountain of liberation. The fountain is the fountain of transcendence, just as it is. And the more closely and specifically you are with it, the more specifically it will, and clearly it will show you that it is that. It's a misnomer, and it's very common among yogi spirituality to think that, liberation is some kind of distancing or letting go or making everything fuzzy. It's exactly the opposite. You find liberation in precision and being absolutely close and absolutely specific with precisely what your experience is. That's where you find the transcendental. It's not escapism, it's exactly the opposite.
That sounds like genuine intimacy.
It is genuine intimacy. It's the ultimate intimacy, and it yields absolute intimacy with the infinite totality. It yields the revelation of that. You already actually have that. But details and complexities are only relevant if they seem to show up. Just this. This is not what you think it is, but it is exactly what it is. And check it out. And then in the context of any complexities that seem to show up, bang, look and see what it actually is. And you'll be looking at this. So it's an extremely simple formula. Just this right here. This is it. Just like it is. nap time. I want to thank you all for joining me. It's really been a joy being with you all. I hope you've had as much fun as I have.
Awesome. Thanks for coming to Santa Fe.
And especially thanks so much for our hosts for making this possible.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks for bringing all your friends here.
Oh yeah, we party. Badly, but we party. Which we're looking.
Pretty subtle party.
Yeah. I said badly.
Please come visit us again.
Yeah.
Well, I might, if my breathing gets any better. I may not. I may come and visit you again elsewhere, a little lower down. But my breathing might improve. Maybe I'll get reincarnated into someone that's healthy. Come back there. No, I'm afraid this might be my last visit to Santa Fe. I love it. I've been coming for, probably a couple dozen times over the last few decades. But I contracted severe asthma a couple of years ago, and I hadn't been here since that happened, and I was not prepared for how the altitude hit me for that. It was very difficult, very debilitating. So, anyhow, you work with what you got.
Have you considered, what's it called, Dimox, the pills for